out were couples who stayed married, and they called those people the masters of relationships, versus those who became divorced. They called them the disasters of relationships. And what they noticed about the disasters of relationships were four main things in how they communicated. How they communicated. Some traditional research will say people divorce because of finances. People divorce because of lack of sexual intimacy. But according to the Gottmans, people divorce because how they communicate. That's how serious it is for us to communicate. So what happened to the disasters? The disasters are to your left. The disasters had a lot of criticism in their communication, contempt, defensiveness, and stonewalling. So when we criticize our partner, our husband, our wife, we verbally attack their personality or character. You're a slob, you're a mess, you're a mama's boy, right? Sound familiar? Don't raise your hand, your spouse might be next to you. Okay, we also, with disasters of relationships, they communicate with contempt. So they're attacking the sense with a sense of intent or insult, assuming position of moral superiority. So basically, I'm better than you. I'm better than you. You ain't got a college degree, I got a college degree. Don't forget who makes the most money in this house, right? Now you're communicating as if you are superior to your husband or your wife. The next one, defensiveness. So victimizing yourself to ward off a perceived attack and reverse the blame. Well, I didn't pay this bill because what happened was, if you would just listen, I meant to tell you about the brand new TV, but what happened was, what's happening? Defensiveness, right? You're not taking ownership when there's an issue. And then last but not least, stonewalling. Stonewalling is basically shutting down on your partner. Like I said, don't raise your hands. Stonewalling means I withdraw, I completely, whenever we're talking, maybe you've criticized me, maybe you've used contempt in our communication. So I do this. Totally shut down, right? That's someone who's shut down, they're withdrawn from the communication. And this is what happened in the research study, so this is evidence-based, when they observed the couples who divorced versus those who stayed together. I want you to pay attention, and I'm gonna be like Mark and I'm gonna respect the time. I want you to pay attention to what those who on the right, or those are the ones we call the masters of relationships. Those were the ones that stayed married. They stayed married. Why did they stay married? So, for example, criticism, it's all about how you respond. It's all about how you respond. I love this stuff because it works and it really does help. How do we heal, or how do we help those experiencing a lot of criticism in their relationship? First things first, we use soft startups. What's a soft startup? A soft startup, it's all about, you've heard the quote, it's not what you say, but it's how you say it. It's not what you say, it's how you say it, right? So what does that look like? What does that even look like? It's about, you left all them dirty dishes in my kitchen. My kitchen. In the house we both own together, but it's my kitchen, right? My territory, right? You left all those dirty dishes in my kitchen. You never come home on time. You always out with your friends. It's not what you say, it's how you say it. So how do we move from a harsh startup to a soft startup? It starts with I statements. So here's an example of an I statement. Because here's the thing, before I get ahead of myself, we are emotionally upset. We become emotionally upset when we feel offended, when any of the horsemen come running into our relationship, right? So we want to express it. We don't want to hold it in. We don't want to get to the point where we stonewall. When you stonewall, you're in the red, and that's not a good sign. So let's use the example. You always out with your friends. You always coming home late. I feel. We start with I feel. Why? Because we're taking ownership of our emotions. I'm not throwing the blame on you. I'm not, pointing my finger at you. I'm going to start off with I feel neglected when you come home late. And I've had dinner set up for you, and me and the kids have been waiting up for you. Do you see how that's different from you always coming home in this house late whenever you want, and you don't think about me and these kids, and we hungry, and the food is cold? It's a different startup. It's a soft startup versus a harsh startup, right? The Bible says we got to be quick to listen and slow to speak, right? May that be an inspiration with a soft startup. Now, I want to share with you another quick tip is an effective I feel statement needs to be followed up with an I need statement. So, I feel neglected when you're coming home late. Food is cold. Me and the kids been waiting for you. What I need is for you to communicate with me in advance if a meeting is running late or you're running behind schedule. Do you see how that works together? I feel, state the situation, I need. Do you see how that works? I call it a formula. I call it a formula. Why? Because we want to communicate to connect. We don't want to just talk at our partner or talk to them. We want to communicate to connect. And it's a skill. It's a skill, right? And honestly, a lot of times you brought up cultural upbringing. We were not raised with a lot of these skills. I'll be honest, I'm Haitian. I grew up in a Creole English-speaking home. And if someone had a feeling that they needed to express, 9 times out of 10, it was through yelling. And guess what? In my first year of marriage, probably in the first 3 months of marriage, I learned that was not an effective way to communicate to my husband. And I was like, oh, I'm not equipped. But I'm here, so I got to do things differently. Sometimes couples, depending on your cultural background, don't want to do couples counseling. But what I ask them is what you're doing right now working? Ask yourself, is what I am doing right now, or what I grew up with in my culture, is it working for this marriage? If it is not, we need to do something different. Okay, so let's move on because I want to also respect the time. I think I probably went over time. Go back. Let me see. Go back. Okay. So I'll stop here because I don't have enough time. But yes, so communicate to address the issue. Like I said, try a gentle startup rather than a harsh startup, right? Use I feel statements followed by an I need statement. Another example is I feel upset when there are dishes everywhere. I need your help in the kitchen. The last tip I'll give you, this is for free. The last tip I'm gonna give you is stay away from the words such as always or never. Stay away from the words such as always or never. Because once you tell your partner, you always come home late, you never remember my birthday, we call that extreme language in couples therapy. And when you communicate extreme language, that means 100% of the time you come in this house late. 100% of the time you forget my birthday or you forget the baby's birthday. And I can guarantee you, I know I don't live with you. I know I don't live in your house. I know, but I'm gonna be in your business for a second. Nobody, absolutely nobody does 100% of something to you all the time, right? Especially when it comes to your partner. And if that is the case, you need to book a session with me. All right, well, thank you all so much for your time. This was fun. I love working with couples, so I hope to, if you guys need anything, I have cards. Okay, bye.
Wow. Good job, Deb.
Thank you.
Hi, everyone. So my fancy presentation did not get on the board, so I'm just going to be speaking at you. So today, I was tasked to speak about depression and anxiety It's hard to follow after these two, but I'm going to try my best. So, so we know like depression and anxiety has been something that's been thrown about. I think we all can probably raise our hands and say that we've had depressive states and we have moments where we're anxious. We're going to be focusing more so the clinical definition of depression. So depression, it can present itself in many ways, and there are signs that can go ahead and let you know whether or not you're dealing with depression, and I'm going to touch on these signs tonight. The first one is your mood. Basically, you have persistent feelings of sadness, anxiety, emptiness, hopelessness, so it's very hard for you to maybe get out of bed or to find hope. You kind of feel like this is never going to change. You feel like it's ongoing and it's really hard for you to kind of like that whatever you're feeling that you're going to grow out of it. And this is basically your mood, the things that you feel on a day-to-day. Then it may be your energy that you may be dealing with, where you feel tired, and even sleeping, you're not sleeping well, or you have lack of energy. The thing about depression is when it hits you, it's one of these things that it can, whenever I'm working with a client that may be dealing with depression, I also have them going to their doctor, because depression and anxiety is one of these things that can start manifesting itself, where you can literally start feeling it physically, even though what's going on, what may be going on with you is mental. You may have difficulty sleeping, waking up too early, or oversleeping, however it may look for you. So it's important to keep track of these signs, because depression, it's one of these things that could get you to start doing opposite of what you usually do. It can also affect your appetite, which means whether you're eating too much or eating way less. That's something to keep track of as well. Your concentration at work. You may see the average person is staring, or you may call them like they're daydreaming. If someone was to be dealing with like severe depression, you may not have listened to anything that was said during these presentations, because you find yourself going in and out. It's really hard for you to focus on the task at hand. You may find that your boss or your work starts to suffer. Your boss is having conversation with you about what's going on. And then there's your physical health, which it can look like having unhealthy physical problems such as aches. People have described it to literally have aches and pains in their body. One of the signs is headaches, stomach aches, stomach problems. So it's maybe the general person who goes to the doctor, and the doctor is telling them like, we ran the tests, we did ABC, but we can't see the signs. So I tell, it's important, like a very trained doctor at that point would start referring that client to see a mental health therapist to rule, we call it like the rule out method. Then it may go into your thoughts. So this is when the person may be dealing with feelings of guilt, feelings of worthlessness. They may feel like nothing that they do is right. They may find themselves fixating on past failures, ruminating, which means whatever it is over. It's hard no matter what it gets you out of the same mindset. And self-blame, that whatever you feel like, whatever it has happened, it could be the smallest thing. You feel that it's your fault. You feel like or even things that, like the weather, if it rains, you feel like you could have prevented it, or car accident on the road, you feel like you could have done something. Someone who may be dealing with depression may have a lot of inner thinking, where they feel like whatever it is, it's on them. They could have stopped it, and it's really, really hard for them to get out of that. And the activities may be like, they may have loss of interest, pleasure and hobbies, like the things that they used to enjoy is not enjoyable anymore, and wanting to do, and not wanting to do things that used to be fun. So maybe even coping skills or things that you used to do you no longer feel like it's enjoyable to do it anymore. You really feel like it's more of a chore now. The thing that used to release, maybe reading a book, traveling, or whatever it is, you feel like it's really, really hard for you to go ahead and do that. So this is more so the clinical stage. So I know that Markin touched on like grief. So you may find someone who may be going through grief, he touched up on that, may go through a bout of depression. And that's a little bit different because if you address the grief, most likely you'll be able to address the depression. But this is more so for like major depressive disorders. Depression is very, it has different categories. So there's major depressive disorders, or there's what we call situational depression, maybe a situation. So for example, someone who may have suffered through grief like Markin talked about, you may find yourself when it's nearing the date of the anniversary or the death of the person who passed, you may find yourself in depression because you're kind of weary, you're thinking about the date that's coming. So that may be, you may find yourself in situational depression because once that time comes, you find yourself falling into that depressive state. Another one that goes in is anxiety disorder. Anxiety disorder and depression is what we would call co-occurring diagnosis because they usually tend to kind of travel hand in hand. It doesn't mean that everyone who has an anxiety has depression, or everyone who has depression have anxiety, but it's very rare for them not to travel. So the clinician, what we would do is to see which one we need to address first, because once you address one, then the other one comes, because one usually bring about the other. So what is anxiety disorder? I feel like nowadays, everyone is like, oh my goodness, my anxiety. And everybody's anxious and everybody have anxiety. But there is what we call clinical or chronic anxiety. And those are people who really cannot help it. Sometimes I feel like we ignore the fact that anxiety can be a good thing. Like, I won't address anxiety on a client depending on how they're telling me they're feeling the anxiety. For example, like, anxiety can push us and lets us know what's important to us. If something is really important to you, you start feeling anxious, what you're going to do is get yourself prepared, do the work in order for you to go ahead and do well. So anxiety in that way could be a good thing. But here, if we were to talk about chronic anxiety, it's a mental health condition. And you may respond to certain things and situations with dread and fear. You also experience physical sign of anxiety, such as a pounding heart and a sweating. So technically, people don't usually you don't usually pass or die from an anxiety attack, though many people says that it feels like that. You feel like your heart is about to pound out of your heart. But if not treated, it could lead to long-term health condition that could go ahead and like your heart. If your heart is always going through bouts of anxiety, then you can end up having a heart problem if your anxiety is not treated in the long run. Example that that lets us know that So anxiety goes beyond the regular nervous and slight fear you may feel from time to time. An anxiety disorder can happen when it basically, what we would be looking at, one of the big things we look at when a client comes to see us is your level of functionality. Whatever you're struggling with, whatever you're dealing with, how is that stopping you from doing what you need to do? We look at your function. We honestly will not touch areas of your life if it doesn't affect your function. We don't go in and just dig or wherever we want to dig. We look at the overall picture, and being like Deborah, I practice from a relational point, so then I may dig into your relationship and dig into the different things that are affecting you. So anxiety interferes with your ability to function. You often overreact when something triggers your emotion. So you ever deal with someone, sometimes you may, I'll give an example. So the other day, I was dealing with a student, and the teacher came to me and was like, "This little boy is so angry. He's always throwing a tantrum. He's in the third grade, this little boy." So I started asking questions about this little boy. When do you see him throwing a tantrum? When he doesn't pass a test, he tends to compete with his classmate, call up his parents. His parent comes into the office. Does he have any siblings? Yes. Is he like hating his siblings? No, he gets along well with his siblings. Do you ever see him get angry? Yes. When he doesn't understand the homework, that's a sign to him. So more and more I asked questions, it became clear to me that this little boy was not dealing with anger issues. He was dealing with anxiety towards his schoolwork. So that's how it may appear. So you may be dealing with someone who may seem like on edge, or they seem like they get flustered, or may set off or go off on you at any point or another. And we're looking at, oh, this person is so like, hard to deal with. And we may be looking at their anger issues or what their attitude problem, but what they may actually be struggling with is anxiety. They're on edge because they haven't dealt with whatever it is that is causing the anxiety. Or the person may have a hard time controlling their situation. So the person who may be overly have like control issues. Don't raise your hand, Jeffrey. So the person that feels the need to control each and every little thing, and that, it needs to go this way. So for those of you guys who have partners or have a spouse, if you notice these things, it may be time to ask questions and see whether or not your partner is, you're looking at the person love control, but what they may actually be dealing with is anxiety. And if everything else is gonna put me on edge, then I need A, B, C, because this is what I can control in order for me to feel like I have some type of control and not set off my anxiety. So whenever someone comes to therapy, one of the techniques that we may teach is the 3 and 3 rule, which is what we call a mindfulness technique. And they even teach this to children. Basically, if someone was to have an anxiety attack right now, one of the things that we may do as the therapist is to help them see 3 things, identify 3 things that they can see. So I see the flag, I see the black tablecloth, I see the purple benches, and then 3 things that I can hear. I can hear my voice on the microphone, I can hear the AC, and I can hear like when you guys are moving about. And then 3 different body parts. So literally, one of the things that I may have the person do is to take off their shoes. If there's towel, then it's perfect because towels are cold, so I'll have them put their feet on the floor, have them touch, different body parts, because if that person having an anxiety attack, they're having an out of touch reality, they're out of touch with reality, so you kind of get them to identify specific things that get them to get back in touch with reality. I'll share a story with you guys really quick before I sit down. So a few years ago, actually, we're on vacation, we're having a good time, I'm so excited to go on vacation. Your pastor gets up and go to the bathroom, and then he runs to me, and he's like, "Baby, somebody's having an anxiety attack. They need you." And I'm like, "No, like, I'm not working. I'm on my way to Mexico. Don't look at me." So then, little did I know is that he told the stewardess that, like, my wife can help. She's a therapist. So then, like, he's telling me and, like, yelling at me to get up. And I can be kind of hard-headed, so I'm looking at it and I'm like, "No, I'm not getting up." Like, he's looking at me. So the stewardess walks over and they're like, "Oh my gosh, I hear you can help." And I'm like, "Okay, fine." So I finally get up and I see this young lady. She's freaking out and out of her mind, and it's very clear that she's having an anxiety attack. So then I'm like, "Get me some ice." So we get some ice, because anything that can change, like bring about a temperature change to bring her back to reality. Put ice on her forehead, hold ice on her hand, take off her shoes, put her feet on the floor of the airplanes, identify some things that the lady was able to go ahead and lend the plan. Please don't mess up my vacation anymore. Thank you, guys.
Can we give a round of applause for all of our panelists today? So what I love about mental health is, especially our panel that we have going on today, is that there's a variety of information. Normally when people hear mental health, they just think of crazy people or just depression and anxiety, and that's it. But you heard about grief, you heard about communication within relationships and depression and anxiety. That is mental health and so much more. So before I have you all ask questions, there are a few questions that we have here, but I do want you all, one more time, to share what exactly does a therapist do? Like, what do you do? Because I think people hear mental health, they hear therapy, but what exactly does a therapist do? And do not use the word therapy. So in the simplest way, for a kindergarten, anybody, what do you do? Anyone can start.
I help people to gain perspective of why they are the way they are and how they got there, and how to retrace back the earliest steps to find healing in those earlier childhood years if they're an adult, and show them small, tangible, practical steps that they can take. And I teach them how it's okay to sit with uncomfortable feelings and situations which in the past they would have reverted to destructive behaviors to deal with.
Good.
Every time Markin speaks, I'm like, how do I come up after it? Yes. Okay, I can't use the word therapy. Well, I was thinking two things. If I were to explain this to a child,
Yeah, a child.
I help people to work through their feelings.
Okay, I like that. That's good. That's good.
I think that's the best way
Yes.
I can break that down to a child.
I think JJ would understand that.
Jeju, okay,
Yeah.
as long as he can understand. And then for a child who needs to know what I'm doing with their parents,
Yes, okay.
I help mommy and daddy talk to each other so they don't fight and yell at each other.
Okay.
I think that's the best breakdown. That was hard.
With the
That
adult,
was
with the
hard.
childlike voice.
Yes,
You
with the
have-
childlike
you have
voice.
to have the childlike
I don't work with
voice.
children, so if you haven't noticed, that's why I'm struggling.
That was good. That was perfect. Thank you.
I would say that I am whatever, therapy for me is whatever my client needs me to be. I can be working with the same client, dealing with the same thing, but they need different things from me. So I don't really know what I'm gonna do until I get in the room with the client.
Now, for me, I understand that because I also am a therapist, but that also, for somebody who is not a therapist, sounds like if your client needs a girlfriend or a boyfriend, if your client needs a wife, you're gonna be all that, nah, Dr. Compere. Let's make it make sense. Because if you say that to a client that's coming in, you're gonna be anything I need.
Well, I explained to them the expectation.
Okay.
of therapy.
Okay, fair enough.
But within the bounds of therapy.
Okay.
I am within the bounds of our sessions, as I can say things.
Yes, there you go.
We're laying down the expectation and
Yes.
rules of therapy.
Yes, there you go. All right, so how would one how does one identify a good therapist? Like somebody is trying out therapy, this is their first time, maybe their second, third, or fourth time, maybe they've tried several times and they couldn't find a good therapist for grief, for counseling, just for anything in their lives. How can they know that who they're working with, and this is for any one of you, is a good fit for them?
This is also research-based as well. All of us are trained in different modalities. All of us have different time periods we've been in school and education and so forth. And research shows that the most effective therapy is the relationship you have with your therapist. So it's not their modality, it's not how long they're in school, it's not how many years they have in training, it's the relationship between the therapist and the client. So if you are in therapy and you don't feel comfortable to share with this person therapy is a very sacred and private and confidential experience. If for some reason you don't feel comfortable, you don't feel safe to open up, or you feel judged, you feel, parented the whole time, or someone's talking down to you, those are some maybe quick ways to realize this is not the best fit, is what we call it. And it's okay to, have that conversation about transitioning to another a therapist, because according to the research, if you don't feel comfortable to share with this person what is really going on, your care is so limited, your progress is going to be limited, and even, it's going to be a waste of your time. So I think that's really important.
That's really good. Now, to follow up with that, how long should that person try to, because, we also say, give it a couple of sessions. How long?
What I would suggest is before you go into a contract-based, you do a consultation. You can ask any therapist to do a consultation with you. And whenever my clients come for the first session, I tell them that I am assessing to see if they're the right client for me, and that I am asking the same of them at the end of the session. So for some clients, I would even say, okay, do you want to wait? Do you want to think it over before you book your next session? Or do you want to go ahead and book it now, just allowing them room? But yeah, like if you're able to go in a consultation and asking them questions before you actually start the sessions, I feel like that would be helpful.
I agree. Just to piggyback, I think all of us in here should have some sense of discernment and wisdom to know once you meet somebody and you're talking to them, and consultations usually about 30, 45 minutes, you should be able to gauge whether or not this person would be good to just continue to have a conversation. By the first official session, which is longer, about 60 minutes, maybe 55 or so, then that's when you can really say, I thought the consultation was good, but now that I'm really into this, this is better, or this is actually not what I thought it was, so I think I'm gonna try elsewhere. So I like that.
I would say, can the therapist speak to your pain point and they seem really knowledgeable about it? Ask all the questions you want. I usually encourage people to ask if they're asking me what to look for in a therapist, I would tell them, ask your therapist if they're in therapy, because this is a field that has a high level of burnout. Just ensuring that we as therapists have somewhere where we can go with our issues as well, because we're still human. And see if the therapist is trying to sell you something, or are you guys even connecting to what Dr. Ruth mentioned earlier, the consultation session? It doesn't take that long to feel if you have some level of connection with someone. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you. Our next question, what do I do if the support doesn't help? I've been going to therapy for some months. I've been going to the same person. I've been doing all the tactics and tools and all the things that have been suggested to me. However, I feel like this is still not helpful.
I think when that happens, we have to reassess two things: your goals for therapy. What were your initial goals for therapy? Have we accomplished them? And there's also sometimes you need a higher quality of care. Currently, I only provide teletherapy. And so that's when I make a suggestion: would a in-person therapy experience be a better fit? I also share, again, I'm a LMFT, I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist. Maybe you need a different modality as well. Someone else who they use a different technique than what I use.
Yeah, I agree. I feel like therapy is one of these things that people, if you go to a specialist, let's say you had a brain tumor and you went to a specialist, that specialist was not working, then most people in here would probably go and find another, advocate for yourself or find another therapist, so another brain doctor. So it's the same thing. If it's not working, the support is not working, do not be afraid to have a candid conversation with your therapist to bring about your concern that you feel like it's not working, but also assess whether or not, like Deb says, whether or not it's time to go to another therapist. What I will say is to not just stop. is to keep going until you find what works for you. Therapy is the same thing like going to different doctors. Not every doctor is the same fit.
Yeah, agreed. All right, so I'm going to ask each of you one question, and then I'm going to open it up to the floor. We'll start with Deb. We'll start with you, Deborah. How do I get my partner to go to therapy with me?
You could drag them by the hair. I'm joking. We don't condone violence. That's a really good question. Because I work with couples, most of the time, someone don't want to be there. And they vocalize it very much so. I don't want to be here. He forced me to come. She forced me to come. But I think it's good to evaluate what are you doing, what's working and what's not working. Having that conversation with your partner. I see a lot of women in individual therapy too, so let me back up. And sometimes they come to me and they say, Deborah, I'm ready for a divorce. I'm done. I'm tired. And I said, well, does your partner know that you're done? And a lot of times, guess what? Their husband has no idea that they are halfway out the door. So in those cases, I suggest, because it's up to you, I suggest have the conversation with your partner, with your husband, to let them know this is where I'm at. I'm done. I'm almost out. I'm almost checked out of this marriage. What do you think we should do? Invite them into the solution process before you make a decision. And a lot of times I notice that's when the husband will call me right up. My wife said she's done and we need to do something, so someone gave me your number. And I'm like, okay. When the husband calls me, then I know we're serious. I know we're serious. Or when the partner who now they've had that conversation calls me, I know we're ready to do some work. But you cannot force your partner to be in couples therapy. If I know that you're forcing them to be in couples therapy, I won't see you because it's going to be very ineffective and it just won't be good.
One more for you, Deb. Is couples therapy only for married couples? Or do you think that people dating, courting, just trying to figure it out should also participate in therapy?
That's a great question. I'm so happy you asked. Couples therapy is not only for married couples. As a matter of fact, I highly recommend seriously dating, like you are serious, you bought the ring or you're looking at rings, seriously dating or engaged, you're talking about it at this point, to start couples therapy as soon as you can. Because all of the skills that I talked about, right? All the skills that I talked about, and I can use myself as an example. Both me and my husband were Christians. We loved the Lord. We did pastoral counseling before we got married, but quickly I realized, wait a minute, we were lacking in certain relational skills. So couples therapy is preventative work because you learn a lot of relational skills that is evidence-based, that works, that can help you in your relationship.
Thank you. Markin, how long is the grieving process?
The grieving process does not have a specific time. It really depends. First of all, time doesn't heal it. It depends what are you doing in the interim of that time.
That's good.
I could speak candidly about my father-in-law. He's in his late 70s, and he lost his father when he was like 9, 10 years old. He still talks about that guy like he lost him yesterday. He's been stuck for 60-something years.
Wow.
And, you know, he's not open to the idea of therapy, but it kind of breaks my heart to see him still in that stuck place, whereas someone else can lose a loved one or a close friend in that grieving process. I don't think we ever get over grief, but we get to this place to where grief becomes that silent house guest who eats with us, sleeps with us, bathes with us. But now we're getting more comfortable with him living with us. And that's where you want to get with grief. You'll never forget your loved one. You'll still cry at times, it's normal, but it's to where you can function now and it's no longer debilitating and you don't feel like you got this albatross wrapped around your ankle and you're dragging your emotions everywhere. It gets lighter, yeah.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Last but not least, Dr. Compere. If I notice someone may be experiencing depression, how can I encourage them to get help?
Wow, that's a good question. I think a lot of times that we don't want to offend people or get in their business,
Yeah.
but I don't think I've had one client that has regretted the fact that someone has approached them for support, even if the person lashes out, get angry with you, or did not necessarily answer you the way you expected. When they are out of it, like it's not as clouded, I think there's a sense of gratefulness that the person usually speaks about. Like I see that all the time with my clients. Who, as they're getting out of the process, they're like, wow, I'm really thankful for this so-and-so. I'm really thankful for that person. I need to go and apologize for that. I think it's better to go and have that conversation and you feel like you're not received well than to see someone suffer and not say anything. I say it's always better to approach.
Yeah, that's good. I agree. All right, the floor is open. Auntie Cindy, I know you had a question.
Ethical to, if the therapist you see isn't working for you, to ask them to recommend another therapist for them. Is that rude?
No, it's not ethical. It's actually, we have to do that. We have something called client abandonment. So we're actually by law and by our field not allowed to let a client go without referring another therapist. We have to either give the list of referral, do a warm transfer where you're able to go ahead and get their consent to contact the other therapist, but we always have to provide you other resources, or it's what's called abandonment, and we're not allowed to do that.
I appreciate everything. You guys are awesome. Thank you. I had a question because I think it was mentioned, Dr. Ruth, you actually mentioned it. Everybody always says, "Oh, I'm so anxious. My anxiety is kicking in." For me, it's aggravating to hear, just speaking personally, that somebody, I guess, self-diagnose themselves with this. At what point should that be a thing? Or is it just people just talking? Because I'm like, it's so aggravating. Because it's like, oh, I'm like, but is it really, like, are you, because people really do suffer from this, as you mentioned, and it's a real thing. Why are you playing around with it? It's so aggravating.
So, I used to be where you are, where like it used to be aggravating, but like in a sense, I've come to understand that like to the basic level, the person is saying that something's going on with them. And I've also come to realize that like, especially me, like I can muster through or feel like I can muster through, but like it may not be the same for another person. So I think leveling down with them and not maybe looking at it the clinical way, but is that person is still saying something is bothering them. So like, yeah, when we have the clinical knowledge, or and you probably know people who deal with real anxiety, so you're looking at them like, you need to stop. But if you're looking at the basic level, that person is still saying like, okay, like something's bothering me, something's not right, I need support in this area. So at that basic level, then I can provide that support instead of educating them on the right thing.
I also know from experience many people like to either have a diagnosis or diagnose themselves. Like it does make some people feel better to know that whatever they're experiencing does have a name to it. Because if they don't label it, then they feel crazy, and then they're like, okay, I'm different, something's wrong with me, and then it just adds to the anxiety they're already feeling. So sometimes we're like, oh, my anxiety, it's also, in a weird sense, a comfort that I can label what I'm experiencing. So it also might just be a cry for help, like Pastor Compere. You had the mic in your hand.
What would you say to that person who say, my pastor is my therapist, so I don't need...
Great question.
I think that's unfair to pastors. If you won't ask your pastor to conduct open heart surgery on a member, you shouldn't ask them to be an expert on the complexities of the brain. There's still there's still a complexity to the human mind after all these years of schooling. We don't even understand. We only understand a fragment, right? And I think so many pastors need to be freed from the guilt to feel like they have to have a solution to everything that the members need, whether it's a physical health issue, a mental health issue. I think one of the ways pastors could practice great self-care, if something seems above the expertise level, refer out to keep the flow of how God's trying to use you in your ministry. So that, because some people, they come packaged with a lot. Because of their traumas, they can get really clingy, really needy, and it's like they're emotionally vomiting on you, but they don't realize it. And then that actually becomes unhealthy boundaries for the pastor, because now he has to devote an excess amount of time and energy and attention to someone who needs more invasive work. So I feel like pastors should be freed from the guilt of, I have to be the solution for this, because one thing you see with Jesus all throughout the Gospels, he's always healing in very creative ways. And I think he wants to remind us at the end of the day, whether it's therapy or the pastor or a physical doctor, God's still going to get the glory for all the healing.
Amen. Amen. And I think it's boundaries as well, Pastor, because we are lucky here at Community Church of God to have a pastor who does have a background in mental health. So he could wear the hat. However, we don't want to put him in that position to do that because he's already wearing the hat of our pastor. So we should take care of our pastor by keeping him in the lane of pastor and not, unless he's going to pay separately for that. How much that is. Just kidding. Any more questions? Yes.
And what is the most efficient and user-friendly way can someone access a therapist or therapy? Like how we go about getting in that room?
Great question.
I will share Psychology Today. Everyone type it in your phone, save it in your phone. Psychology Today is what I call the Google of therapists.
Yes.
And if all of us actually are on Psychology Today, any licensed therapist, and even when I was a registered therapist, I was on psychologytoday.com. It'll give you a list of our modalities, or what techniques we use, whether they're faith-based, if you want a Christian counselor, if they take your insurance or they take private pay. Psychology Today is your best first step. And if you have health insurance, you can also find out on your EAP if they have, that's a quick way to know that this person is in your benefits.
So sometimes, depending on the area where you live at, you can just Google the type of therapy you're looking for and hit near me, and you'll see a list of therapists, because a lot of us have Google My Business accounts, so we'll populate if we're near where you're at locally. Yeah.
And I also want to add, there's this website called Open Path. That is for psychology. It's like our real price, and we're not compromising it. And then there's Open Path, which is a website that basically holds us counselors accountable, that if we're listed on that website and a person is seeking therapy, is that we're agreeing to provide services at a lower cost, and it can be as low as $65 or $70 per session. So it's called Open Path.
.com.
.com.
Go ahead.
So you talked about stonewalling. Okay, so I have a problem with that.
Wait.
So I do the I statements, but then I also stonewall at the same time. So how do I stop that? Because I'd be like, I need you to get out of my face because.
She gave examples. She gave examples.
So
That
with
was a good
up there,
example.
So I need you to be quiet because you're making me mad. And I look at him, and he goes. I'm like, so I need you to stop. So how do? So are you? Cause therapy says to do the I do the statement. So how do I stonewall it?
So what did we learn tonight? It's not what you say, but
It's how you say it.
But I'm saying get calm. I'm saying I need you.
It's the eyes and the face. That's communication as well.
No, but so how do I fix that? That's my biggest.
yes. So
How do I communicate?
I didn't even get to go into all of my communication presentation, but communication is verbal, it's nonverbal, and it's paraverbal. Paracommunication is the inflection in our tone. I need you to go wash some dishes. I said it calmly. But there was a little hint of attitude. There was a little hint of, you on my last nerve. There's a little hint of condescending, right? So yes, we could be using patronizing, right? So, and people know, men know, women know, children know. People know when, yes, you are talking to them properly, you can feel it, right?
feel it.
But they know when there's a hint of, she's about to pounce, or she's really annoyed. So the antidote for stonewalling, because what's gonna happen is you're so frustrated, you're just like, all right, I'm done, I'm over it. You need to get to a point where you can self-soothe. Take a deep breath. Babe, I asked earlier, and this still hasn't been done yet. You see how there is no tension behind that, because what did I do? I self-soothed. I calmed myself. I dealt with that frustration before I even ask the request or say the I need statement. Is that helpful?
And to add to how Deborah just eloquently conveyed that, I would also say anger can sometimes be a friend because it's a secondary emotion. It's telling you there's something deeper there. Why are you angry? Maybe, I'm just painting hypothetical, this ain't no prophecy. Maybe the frustration is the thing that he does that gets me so upset causes me to feel so alone. I feel like my mother right now because I watch her struggle and frustration and feel so alone growing up.
Okay.
And I've always made a commitment to never be like my mom.
Yeah.
And right now I see my husband doing the same thing to me and I'm stuck, right? It could have all that generational connection there too. So the anger's trying to say, hey, Deborah, there's something here. Don't ignore me now. Let's get curious. Let's lean into this, see what's really underneath this, and unpack it. And that starts with, okay, what meaning is coming up for me when I feel angry? Do I feel unloved? Do I feel alone? Do I feel like I'm not good enough? I don't measure up? There's a deeper meaning here that may not have nothing to do with my husband, but what his attitude and face represent right now that's been in this family for a minute.
And I also... Go ahead.
Go ahead.
I wanted to also even use what she said.
Yes.
She says, I need you to get out of my face.
Yes.
So yes, that's what you're communicating, but another way is, babe, I need some space right now. We're not getting anywhere. The next word that I use, they're not going to be loving, they're not going to be uplifting. So I need some space right now.
Yeah.
So I think it goes back to what Deborah was saying, is that you have to be in tune enough with yourself and your own emotions, where you're realizing what's going on with you, and then communicate out of that. Is that, yeah, you need the space, that's what you need. But first you have to realize that's what you need, then be able to clearly communicate it, that, okay, this is what I need right now.
Yes.
I'm not thinking nice thoughts, I'm about to go ahead and say the wrong things, and then you're able to communicate out of that. Okay, babe, I need some space right now to gather myself, and then we can continue this conversation.
I also want to point out that she's, the example or the teaching that Deborah gave, it started with how you feel. It's not automatically, I need. In order for your partner or anybody to understand where you're coming from, it's best to start with where you currently are. So as Dr. Compere said, I feel a little frustration, I feel this because of X, Y, and Z, so I think I need some space, I think I need a moment. That communicates clearly why you need the moment, why you need the dishes to be washed, why you need X, Y, and Z. But if you don't start with where you are now, before you get to where you're trying to go, that's where the because then I need. Okay, but why? What happened to? Oh my! And then that person is going to be anxious. I did this. I did that. I could have had that. But no, I'm feeling this because of this, and so therefore I need that, and that's all. So I hope that's helpful. Yes. Go ahead. Oh, sorry, Sister Blossom. Yeah, we go.
Getting anxiety treated with medication, I heard you speak about the ICE technique. Is there any other way to like calm anxiety down, like naturally, like with breathing techniques or something? Because like I have a child that's an overachiever, and like if there's something happening in school outside of prayer, is there something else you can do, like breathing techniques or to calm down the anxiety? Because sometimes there's triggers and you know why you're having anxiety. So how do you like go about that?
Okay. You said outside of medication, right?
Yes.
Okay, so there's multiple techniques. So like whenever, if we were to, ideally, we want to use talk therapy with coping skills. So like for the person to be seeing a therapist, and then the therapist would be walking them through different techniques. So there's all kind of techniques. The 3-3 rule that I use, there's the belly breathing, where you place your hand on your belly. Deb, help me out. A hand on your belly, a hand on your chest, and then 1, 2, 3. You can count with them again. 1, 2, 3. So the person can do that until they like calm themselves. So you want the person to be paying attention to their heartbeat, and then the belly to see it extend in and out. There is, please feel free to jump in, you guys. There is the 5 senses as well. Touch, feel, smell, market.
I do this with my little kids every night, and it helps them go to sleep. I set a timer. I play some worship, like instrumental music, and I was like, let's close our eyes and let's just sit still for 2 minutes. I see them peeking and everything, but it's teaching their brains how to focus and be still. They did research years ago where they said, would you rather get an electrical shock or sit here and do nothing? And most people chose the shock. And if you think about our generation today, if you waiting for 3 to 5 minutes anywhere, what do? We take that phone out. Our brains are overly stimulated. So the art of learning to be still, you're teaching the mind how to turn off the noise. It's going to feel really uncomfortable because you're going to be flooded with thoughts and emotions. And later on, as she's being still, she can start to pay attention to her body. Okay, when I feel anxiety, you really get triggered in your body before your mind, right? But oftentimes we don't pay attention to maybe the heaviness in our gut, the heart palpitations. We just feel the overwhelming thoughts and we start to panic. So the art of learning to slow everything down, notice what's going on with her body, what are the cues it's communicating. It can be to start to, I wouldn't say stop the anxiety, but make her feel like she has a little bit of agency over it.
Part of the problem with anxiety is the fear of the unknown, so the thoughts that we're having, the what ifs, what if this is gonna happen, what if I fail, I'm gonna not, all of it. So along with those exercises, like along with the breathing, along with the mindfulness music in the background, reciting scripture, or just in a very calm tone, say, you are doing just fine. You're doing the very best you can. Breathe in, breathe out. Take a second. You are right here. You are not failing. And if you do, we'll worry about that another time. You need to, maybe that means you need to study. Like just the thoughts that are happening, have your child just kind of say it out loud. Like, what do you, because it's just mind games that just keeps going and going and going. But when you start spewing it, if you have somebody that's partnering there with you that can say, oh, that doesn't even make any sense. How does that make any sense? How do you know that's going to happen? You're worried about something that we may know, we don't know if it's going to happen. So if you help the person to come back to the present moment, because normally anxiety is either in the past or it's in the future, but it's not here right now. So the whole point, the whole thing to do is just to get them planted right here in the present moment.
I also want to add that some other techniques that have been shown to be helpful is exercise as well, like legit, like 20, 15-minute exercise and meditation. And I know that like with our Christian background that it's frowned upon, but yoga, if the person is able to practice it in a way without going into deep yoga like non-spiritual yoga, like television, like YouTube has that, like where you can literally put like Christian yoga and guided meditation. That's another good one that I do with my clients as well. Like in the beginning of the day, have them do 5 minutes. If you go on YouTube, you put guided meditation, they'll give you 5 minutes of someone talking and then your child just, or whoever, learning how to go ahead and go through that process.
Can I say, I feel like I'm in church, I got the finger up. I am, but you know what I mean, like Sunday morning. You know what, you say your daughter, right, ma'am? Get a little curious with it and say, okay, baby, if you don't overachieve, what does that say about you? Maybe she'll say, I'm gonna fail. Okay, if you fail, then what? And it may lead to a rabbit trail to where she's afraid of disappointing you, right? And that's not to in any ways be a reflection of parenting, but here's the hardest thing about parenting. We can say and do things with all the best intentions, but our kids interpret it differently. You may have said something like, oh, you know what, in this family, we do our best educations first, and in your child's mind, she's interpreting, if I want mama to love me, I gotta get straight A's. You never said that, but that's how she interpreted it in her little mind, right? Or it's this sense of, oh, I saw her mama praise my big sister when she made the honor roll. I gotta make the honor roll, because if I make the honor roll, I'm gonna get mama's love. You know, not realizing you had it all along, you know, like the prodigal son story, right? So it could be to where she's went off this far left place in her thinking, because oftentimes when we're left to our own thoughts, we create an entire sermon. And just see where it leads to, and maybe she can reveal to you what that deeper fear is. And you can say, baby, why you thought that? Of course I love you. Of course how I feel about you will never change. And I would say explore that a little bit, yeah.
Thank you. This will be our last question. Dr. Julia?
My question is, in the Christian context, through my experience over decades of going to different churches, something that I think a lot of people have struggled with is whether it's appropriate for Christians to have boundaries. So I personally am a very big fan of boundaries, and I feel that in the Bible, Christ modeled them, like literally going up on the mountain and praying and encouraging his disciples to go and rest and rejuvenate and all of that. But in your practices, how do you encourage your clients, especially those who are from a Christian background, that it's A-okay to have boundaries and how to develop them?
Great question.
I share with my clients, boundaries is a practice. And I think that's really important to emphasize, because we can have a session, 50 minutes talking about boundaries, and they come back and they say, Miss Deborah, it didn't work. My mom's still in my business. My aunt still wants to know this. My uncle still wants to know that. And I remind them it is a practice. Jesus had a practice. Whenever you study the life of Jesus in the New Testament, over and over again, as it was custom, he went up the mountain to spend time with his Father, right? So what is that? That is a practice of spending time with the Father. Nobody else was invited into that space, only time with him and his father. And he also had time with him and specific disciples, right? So this was a practice that he did daily. So if you come into therapy and you are not one who has been practicing boundaries, you cannot expect the first time you try to incorporate them in your life that everyone around you will respect those boundaries. So you have to have an ongoing practice of this is allowed, this is not allowed. In the Old Testament, we learn about the Holy of Holies. The Holy of Holies, right? Not everyone was allowed in the Holy of Holies. I use this example all the time when I'm talking about boundaries. Why? Because it was such a sacred space that only certain priests, God only allowed certain priests into the Holy of Holies. And I share with my clients, think about your heart in that way. Think about how sacred your heart is. Think about how sacred your mind is. And you got to really think about those who you are allowing access to your heart and your mind. So that is how I start breaking down from a Christ perspective, from a biblical perspective, about how sacred our boundaries are and how we have to get into a practice of picturing our hearts and our minds as if they were the Holy of Holies.
And somewhere along the way we lost our boundaries, because if you think about it, when we are with babies, what happens when mama put that nasty baby food in our mouth? We spit it out. We don't overthink, oh, I don't want to disappoint mama, or what they gonna think of me. We just, nah, this ain't it. We spit this out. But over time, in an attempt to be validated, accepted, feel loved, we learn to play a game of picking and choosing with our boundaries. Now, I would say this, before we set healthy boundaries, we have to first find out, is there something that's dysfunctional that we've been living in for years that we think is normal that's causing us to not honor boundaries? Sometimes we have very emotionally needed parents. When we try to set healthy boundaries with us, they'll say something like, for how long I struggle with you, what I've been through, and that's how you gonna treat your daddy? Thank you. Okay, all right. That manipulation there makes you feel like, okay, I'll just do it, right? But learning that freedom is, I love you too much to allow you to hold on to me, right? Because whatever God has for me, I'll never really discover it if I continue to have this unhealthy clinginess to you, right? And it doesn't have to be, it's all about how you say no. Going back to Deborah with communication. If it's someone who can't honor boundaries, instead of saying, sometimes we go to the extreme, no, leave me alone. We get real irritable and mean, but it could say, you know what, I'm sorry, but I'm unavailable. I won't be able to do that. Sometimes it's, you know what, let me get back to you. I need to look at my calendar. Thinking about it, taking a couple days to process it and say, you know what, this person's just taking advantage of me way too many times. I'm sorry, I won't be available, right? Sometimes boundaries is letting the phone ring, let it go to missed call and say, what time is it? Is it about 9? Okay, I'll call them tomorrow. I'm not calling them tonight. So boundaries is, what do I need to do right now to not feel anxious, to not feel like my space is being invaded, to give me enough time to think about it, maybe call up the pastor, one of the leaders, and have them counsel me through it, pray through it, and just really process it before giving this individual a response. And it's a journey, because sometimes we need boundaries all across the board, and we're not going to learn it overnight just by saying no. We have to really think through every situation before we can make it a practice in every area in our lives. Yeah.
I think also, too, one thing that I communicate to my clients is that boundaries are for you, not for the other people involved. You're almost never going to hear the other person you're putting boundaries with to say, thank you so much for putting up that boundary with me. They're not going to. Their job, I tell my clients, your job is to either communicate or place that boundary. Their job is to push that boundary. So as Deborah stated, yes, if you're putting boundaries for the first time, you best believe it. Like, they're gonna push it back, and you have to be persistent and confident in putting in. If you give in, then you look kind of like exactly what the Bible says, hot and cold, and you're gonna look like, what are you doing, or whatnot. But you ever meet people that have boundaries where people will start communicate what your boundaries are? Like my close friends will say, "Oh yeah, Ruth don't like this. Ruth don't like that." Like people who knows me know my boundaries, so they communicate it for me. Oh yeah, Ruth wouldn't do this. Ruth would do that, because whether I've said it out loud or the way that I practice my life, then I put up our boundaries. So I have a client who comes and they have no boundaries and they're like wanting to know this, that, and this. I'm very clear immediately about where my boundaries are with that client. And being that I'm trying to build rapport with the client, I may not say, no, that's none of your business. I'm not going to tell you this. But based on how I move and how I go about in session, the client will know and they'll never ask me that question again. And what I'm doing is I'm emulating it for them, where the client will start to go ahead and incorporate it in their own personal lives.
Okay, thank you all. Can we give a round of applause for our panelists? Mark and Vomi, Deborah Richelieu, and our very own Dr. Ruth Compere. Let us stand. We have some refreshments for you all back in the foyer. Pastor, do we have any announcements? No announcements? Okay. Sister Cynthia, will you please close us out in prayer?